Good morning everyone, how's it going today? Welcome to this LangChain tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to be seeing how LangChain memory works. We're going to be exploring two different types of memory that work with LangChain. The first one of which is buffer memory and the second one is entity memory. And in order to do that, we're going to be building this project right here to demonstrate the use. You will be able to open your terminal and to run ChatGPT inside of it. As you can see, it introduces itself as ChatGPT, and I can say, my name is Alejandro, and as you will see, it has a memory, because if I ask my name afterwards, what is my name? It will see that it will tell me my name exactly. All right. So we will be going through the theory and the coding part of developing this application. And yeah, I hope you will find this useful. If you would like to see more videos about software development and artificial intelligence, be sure to subscribe. All right. So let's get right into it. All right. So let's start with the coding part. Here I have my project already set up. If you want a more detailed explanation of how to set up your projects in Python, just let me know in the comments. But for now, I'm just going to explain this to you super quick and over the surface. So I have my main.py file right here. I have imported two dependencies that I'm going to use. I have previously installed .env, and I have my test right here that tests if the application is being executed directly or imported, so that my function right here will only load if my file is being executed directly, okay? Then I have my gitignore file right here, in which I have all of the files that I don't want to be tracked on Git. I have my .env.example right here, which is the file that is going to be tracked on Git, that will contain the structure of my secrets. And here is the file where I will actually contain my secrets, okay, .env. And as you can see, the secret for this application that we're going to be building is the OpenAI API key, because we're going to be building our chatbot using OpenAI's API. As a reminder, remember that if you're working with LangChain, you want your OpenAI API key environment variable to have this exact name, OpenAI API low-key, because that's the environment variable name that LangChain actually looks for, okay? So yeah, there we go. And I also have my virtual environment already set up right here. And yeah, now to finish the setup, I'm just going to install my dependencies. The dependencies that we're going to be working with are LangChain, and as I mentioned before, .env. Okay, so let's do that. I'm going to do pip install LangChain, and then I'm also going to install .env. The package for .env is python.env, like that. To me, it doesn't take a long time because I already have them installed, but to you it might take a little bit longer. Then I just imported .env and load.env, the load.env function, which basically allows me to use my secrets that I have stored right here. In other words, once I run this function, my API key will be available on os.getEnv, and then the name of my variable. So this is under the hood, this is what LangChain is doing to find my API key. All right. So let me just show you how this works. I'm just going to go back to my terminal. There we go. Then if I get out of here, and then if I go to my, you know what, I'm going to run it from here. And then if I run this application like this, you can see that I can run my API key is, and it shows my API key, because that's all that I'm printing. All right, so it seems to be working correctly. Now it's time to actually start coding the application. Let's get right into it. All right, so let's get right into using the first kind of memory from LangChain, which is conversation buffer memory. Okay, this is the most basic kind of memory, because all that it does is it stores the history of your entire conversation, and it sends that history of all the messages back to the language model. That way the language model has all the context that it needs to answer the next question with memory, right? There is indeed a class pre-built in LangChain that allows you to implement this kind of memory, but ourselves, we're going to be building it ourselves first, just so that you have an intuition of what is actually going behind the scenes, okay? So the first thing that you're going to want to do is import the chat model from LangChain, okay? So let's do that. We're going to do from LangChain dot chat models. We're going to import chat OpenAI, okay? And just as a reminder, yes, we are importing it from LangChain, but this is not coming from LangChain itself. This is just a wrapper for the OpenAI API, okay? That is the reason why we need our OpenAI key right here. And then we're going to also import from LangChain, from the schemas, we're going to import 3 different schemas. The first one is going to be the system message, which is the first message that we're going to give the language model in order to tell it the instructions of what it is supposed to be. So for example, it can be, you are a helpful assistant, or you are a translator from English to French, or something like that. The second one is going to be the human message, which is going to be our message that we're going to be using, that we're going to be asking questions to. It's the message that contains our questions. And the third one is going to be AI message, which is the message that is the response from the AI model, okay? There we go. Now, once that we have all of that imported, first thing that we're going to do is we're going to test our API key. Just verify that it is actually installed. It's actually included in our environment variables, because if it's not included, we want to close the application immediately because it's useless without an API key. So I'm going to do if os get env, and I'm going to say that I'm going to test if my OpenAI API key is none, or not only do I want to close the application if this variable is none, I also want to close it if it's equal to an empty string. Then I'm going to do print OpenAI, like this. The OpenAI key is not set. Please add your key to .env. There you go. And then we're going to exit the application like that. This way, if the OpenAI key variable is not set, or if it equals an empty string, which means that if it's set like this, it's actually set, but it's an empty string. So if it's like this, we also want to close the application. We're going to exit. And else, we're just going to print that our OpenAI API, let's just API key set, like that. There you go. Now that our API key is set, we can actually start creating our models. All right. So first things first, we want to create our chat model. I'm going to call it chat like this. I'm going to initialize it with chat OpenAI like this. And this class actually takes a few parameters, or it can take a few optional parameters. One of which is the temperature, the temperature is a number that goes from 0 to 10. The closer it is to 0, the less creative it is, and the closer it is to 10, the more creative it is. So for example, a good way to think about this is that if you set it to 0, every time you send a prompt, the same prompt is going to return to you the same answer, right? If you set it to 10, which is the most creative level, the same prompts will not necessarily give the same answer. In this case, for example, temperature of 10 would be useful for something like copywriting, generating brand names, poems, blog posts, etc. But since we're doing something a little bit more technical, we can go with 0. I can go with 3 right here, just to show you. And then we can also adjust the model name. As you can see here, the default model that we're going to be using is GPT 3.5 Turbo, which is the default language model for ChatGPT. However, if you have access to GPT-4, you just have to add here GPT-4 like that. And if you want to see which models are available to you, you just have to go to OpenAI models like this, and then just check them right here. If you have access to GPT-4, you will just be able to use one of this. I myself am just going to be using GPT 3.5 Turbo, which is the standard one for ChatGPT. There we go. And once that the chat is already initialized, we're going to be initializing the variable that is going to track all of our messages. Okay, so let's just add a variable called messages, and this one is just going to be an array with all of our messages. And the first message that we're going to be adding is the system message. So let's add it like this. System message. And this kind of messages this comes from the schema that we imported up here. And this one takes not a context, but a content. And here you just add the content of your message. In this case, since it is a system message, it is the first message of the conversation that instructs the language model the role that it has to take. So I'm just going to tell it, you are a helpful assistant, like that. And then all of the subsequent messages of the conversation will be appended at the end of this array. So you can see it like this. Here you have your system message. And then once I send a human message, you will have a human message right here with content. And then you will have an AI message, etc. Okay. So, but we're going to be doing that as we send questions to our model. So for now, this seems to be working correctly. We have added our chat, we have added our messages, and let's just print a small greeting, a short greeting for the new user. So we'll do, hello, I am ChatGPT CLI. There you go. Now if we save it, let's see if it runs. There you go. Hello, I am ChatGPT CLI, and the API key is set. So there we go. So now it's time to actually start coding the loop that is going to take our conversation. Okay, there we go. All right, so now we're actually going to be building the chat interface for our chat application. In order to do that, remember that we're going to be requesting a question or a prompt from the user, and we're going to be doing that in an infinite loop. So every time they send a question, we're going to prompt them to ask another question. In order to create that infinite loop, we're going to do while true. And now, in order to create an input in Python, all you need is an input like this. And this is the prompt that you want to give. And the actual value of that input, we're going to store it in a variable called user input, like this. Now, just to show you how it works, I'm going to print out that input. I'm going to say you send. And then I'm going to just to print the user input, just to show you how it works. Now let's execute it right here. Hello. And if I say hello, how are you? You can see that our input is sent back to us because that input value is stored inside of this user input variable. All right. All right. So what we're going to be doing now that we have that input stored in a variable, we're going to be appending that into our messages history that we have right here. In order to do that, all we have to do is call the messages, and we say that we're going to append a new message. And here we're going to say what schema we want to append it with. And just as you might remember, we imported a human message schema, which is going to be used when it's the human message. And this one, just as the system message, takes a content attribute. And as the content, we're just going to send the content of the user input. And now we're going to want to generate our response. And you'll know that to generate it, we're going to be using this chat object that we initialized before. So we're going to do chat, and we're just going to send the history of all of our messages. And we're going to store that in a response like this. AI response, like that. And let's just print that response. I'm just going to say that the assistant says, I'm going to say that we're going to concatenate here the AI response like this. Now, in the response actually from the object, it's not just the text. It contains the response, and just as in this schema, it contains the content inside of a property called content. So I'm going to say .content right here to actually print just the text of the response. There you go. And last but not least, actually, before we print the assistant response, we want to append it as well to our history. Because as you can see, so far we have appended our system message, we have appended our human message, but we don't have the AI response message. So let's do that right here. I'm just going to say messages.append. And in order to append the AI message, I'm going to be using the AI message schema. Let's do that. AI message. And as the content, I'm just going to say that it is the AI response. And just as I mentioned before, we need to access the content property inside of this response. So let's do it like that. There you go. Now we have the content, and it should be working correctly if I'm not mistaken. Now let's open it again. Remember that when you're inside the chat, if you want to get out of the chat, you just have to do Ctrl+C, okay? So now let's just open it again. Now, hello, I'm ChatGPT CLI. Hello, my name is Alejandro. And there seems to be a problem with the temperature. What's going on? Usually the temperature is supposed to be between 0 and 1. Let's see, does that work? Oops. Yeah, apparently, okay, all right. I think they probably changed it. Before it used to be between 0 and 10, but now apparently it's between 0 and 1. So yeah, the temperature is supposed to be then between your 0 and your 1. So there you go. Now, as you can see, we have an assistant that is responding to us. Let's just say my name is Alejandro. Will it remember my name? What is my name? And it seems to remember my name correctly. All right, let's just to show you real quick, actually, just the entire history of messages. I'm just going to print also the messages right here. History, history. Just to show you real quick what is going on. Remember, to get out is Ctrl+C. Let's just run it again. Hello there. And as you can see here, I have my response and also my history, which contains the system message, you're a helpful assistant, and also contains my human message, hello there, and then the AI message, which is the response, which is hello, how can I assist you today, which is what it responded right here. And it's going to go on if I do my name is Alejandro. It's going to contain that message as well in the history. So as you can see, the history starts all from your helpful assistant and goes all the way to hi Alejandro, which is the latest response from the assistant. There you go. This is the most basic approach to memory handling in chat models for language. In chat models. What we're going to be doing now is we're going to be doing exactly the same thing, but without coding it ourselves. We're going to be using the wrapper by LangChain, and you will see that it's going to make it way easier. Okay, I'm going to leave this file right here, and I'm going to leave it in the repository, in the GitHub repository, so that you can check it. All right, there we go. All right, so now it is time to do exactly the same thing, but we're using this conversation buffer memory class from LangChain. It's a very useful class that you will be able to use in other projects, hopefully. And let me just show you how it works. Previously, we had imported the schemas by hand, but this time we're actually going to be importing only a conversation chain, which is going to take care of this by itself, right? So we're going to say that from LangChain, we're going to import a conversation, from LangChain chains, actually. There you go. We're going to be importing a conversation chain like that. And then we're also going to import from LangChain memory. We're going to be importing the conversation buffer memory, as we mentioned before, okay? So this time we're not going to be needing to initialize our chat and our messages. What we're actually going to be needing to do is we're going to be initializing our language model. So I'm going to call it large language model, and I'm going to initialize it as chat OpenAI, just as we did before. And there you go. There you have it. Just as before, remember that you can set the temperature, and you can also set the model name, etc. I'm just going to leave it as default for this example. And also something I wanted to mention is that, as you can see, we're just like initializing our language model in a variable. This is like the main advantage of using LangChain, because that means that you can just change this class right here to any other language model that you want, something like I don't know, Hugging Face or something like that, and you will be able to just use it as you would use the OpenAI model, right? Let me show you how that works right here. We're going to start a conversation object right here, conversation, and we're going to initialize it from the conversation chain that we imported a moment ago. And here it takes a variable, an attribute of language model, and we're just going to pass in the language model that we initialized before. And that's exactly why it's important to use LangChain, because here, as I mentioned, you can just basically plug in any other language model that you want, and then just by changing this line right here, this line will be completely the same, and it's going to continue working perfectly. The second attribute that we want to set is the memory attribute this time, and we're going to be setting it to the conversation buffer memory, as I mentioned before. Don't remember the parenthesis because you have to initialize the instance. And last but not least, we're going to set it verbose. Let me just move it to a new line like this. We're going to set it to verbose to true, so that it outputs what it's doing in real time. All right. Now that we have initialized our conversation, we have printed our welcome message as well, and you will see how this part right here becomes way simpler. We will not need to append messages or anything. It's all going to be dealt with by our object conversation right here. So let's do that here. I'm just going to remove all of these things. I am taking the input as well. But here, I'm going to be saying that the AI response this time is going to be conversation from the object that I initialized up here. And here, this time, it takes we have to use the method of predict, right? And then all that it takes is the string, right? So the string of the question that you're asking the model. In our case, it's the user input. And this one actually is a parameter called input, like this. There you go. And actually this this chain doesn't return the object with the content inside. It just returns the string. So no need to open the .content right there. And yeah, there you go. Now, as you can see, we're not storing the response from this conversation in any other object, because the conversation object is taking care of all of it all by itself, right? So let's see how that looks. Now, if I run this, there seems to be a problem here, or it's not. What's going on here? It's probably running somewhere else. There you go. No, there was a problem with my terminal, but there you go. Hello, I'm ChatGPT. Hello, my name is Alejandro. And you will see that we will have more information right here because we set it to verbose true. So now you have the answer from the assistant, and you can see that it's tracking the entire conversation. So I can do something like, what is my name? And you see that every time it's thinking, it's taking into consideration the entire current conversation right here, okay? And this chain also contains an initial prompt that looks like this. So just so that you know that you have an initial prompt inside of here as well. So you don't have to set a system message saying you're a helpful assistant. And there is a way to modify this as well as an attribute when you initialize the chain. So there you go. Now that is how to use the buffer memory. Now let's take a look into the more advanced type of memory from LangChain, which is entity memory. All right, let's get right into it. All right, so the second and last kind of memory that we're going to be dealing with in this tutorial is the entity memory. And this is a very interesting kind of memory because it doesn't involve remembering the entire conversation, the entire history of the conversation. What it does is it inspects the conversation and summarizes it into entities, and then it is those entities that work as a memory, okay? And it uses, of course, a language model to summarize it. So, for example, here is a very, very, very nice example that they give in the documentation. So, let's say that you start off by saying that Devin and Sam are working on a hackathon project. If we had been using a buffer memory, all that our chain would do would be store this in a history and then just send it back to the API. But the idea behind the entity memory is that it saves some context from the conversation and it takes out the entities of the conversation. The entities can be things like places, people, etc. And in our case, the entities that the language model identified are Devin, and then it contains some information about Devin. So Devin is working on a hackathon project with Sam, which they are entering into a hackathon. And then it identified Sam as another entity. So you can see that it knows that Sam is working on a hackathon project with Devin. And it also contains the entity LangChain for some reason here. So there you go. Just as an introduction to entity memory, just remember that it doesn't involve remembering the entire history of the conversation, but specific information about the entities of the conversation. And it gets that information using a language model as well. So let's see how that looks right here in action. All right. In order to use this, we're going to be switching the conversation buffer memory for a conversation entity memory, like that. And we're also going to be importing a new prompt that we're going to be using for the entity memory, because that's we're going to need to prompt the model so that it knows that it has to use entity memory. So in order to do that, we're going to import from LangChain, from langchain.memory.prompt. We're going to import entity memory conversation template, like that. All right. And what we're going to be changing here, we're going to be keeping the LLM as chat OpenAI. And the conversation this time also involves the conversation chain, just as before. We set our language model, just as before. And instead of memory, setting it to buffer memory, we're going to be setting it to conversation entity memory. And remember that I told you that this memory requires a language model to generate the entities inside of it, right? So it's remembering important information about the entities in the conversation, but it needs a language model to generate that information from the entities, okay? So in order to do that, we're also going to have to pass a language model to the memory, to the memory class. And we're going to do it just like that. We can use the same one as we're using for the conversation. And then last but not least, we're going to set a prompt to the prompt that we imported before, which is entity memory conversation template, like that. Now it seems to be working correctly. And that's actually the only thing that we're changing, because we're also using the conversation just as before. But since I set the variables to true, you're going to see how the bot is thinking differently than last time, okay? So I'm going to run this. I'm going to save it and run it. And you can see, hello, I am ChatGPT CLI. I'm going to say, my name is Alejandro and I work in Paris. There you go. So now you can see that it's thinking by itself, and it has identified two entities in my message. It has identified Alejandro and Paris. Now, if and of course it sent a response. Now, if I add more information to it, let's say, I am working here on a project with John, who is a web designer. Then it identifies some other context. It identifies that Paris is where I work, and it identifies the context of John, which is another entity, okay? In our case, let's ask it a question about what John does. What does John do? And you will see that it identifies the context that John is a web designer who is currently working with me on a project in Paris. And this, as you might remember, this is not some information that I wrote explicitly like this. This is just information that appeared in the conversation, and the language model is remembering it by associating it to the entity of John. And this just makes it a little bit easier to deal with long conversations, because if you have a super long conversation, you're not going to be able to send the entire history of messages to your language model. So this kind of memory is very useful when you want to deal with long conversations. You just have to summarize. By itself, it just summarizes the important information from the entities and then answers based on that. And last but not least, just to show you, so far we have been displaying this green text right here, which is kind of the thinking mechanisms from the language model. But in order to disable that, we just have to set the verbose parameter to false. And then if I run this again, you can see that hello, how are you? It doesn't print the green text anymore. It just prints the response. So there you go. Now that's how to make this chatbot. Now, super quick, let's just add it let's just create a command so that we can run it directly from the terminal whenever we want. Okay, so let's get right into it. All right, so in order to add this to add this ChatGPT to your command line and to be able to use it whenever you want from whichever location you are, we're going to create an alias that is going to work as a command to open it directly from our terminal. Okay. First thing you have to do is you will have to figure out if you're running what kind of shell you're running. I am running ZSH. You might be using Bash instead. I don't know. It depends on your computer. Of course, this only works for Unix. Unix-based systems like Mac and Linux. But in order to figure out which kind of shell you're using, you're going to do echo shell like this. And then if right here you see ZSH, it means that you're running ZSH. If you see Bash, that means you're running Bash. Now that what you're going to do is you're going to go to your home folder, which is cd tilde like this. Then you're going to do ls and see everything. And here, the files that start with a dot are the files that are hidden. So you're going to be looking for the file. If you're running zsh, the file is going to be .zshrc, like this. If you're running bash, the file that you're going to want to modify is .bashrc. Okay. So in order to modify it, I mean, you can use v. I like to use v, but just to make things simpler right here, I'm just going to use code. And in order to open it, you just do code set shrc or bash rc, if that's your case. And then it's going to open this file right here. For me, it's a very big file. For you, it might be empty, but just because I have installed several things right here. And what you're going to do is just open a new line wherever you want. I'm just going to add it somewhere right here. And you're going to add this line right here. As you can see, it has an it starts as alias. And then the first part right here is the name of the command that you wanted to, the command that you want how you want to name your command. So this way, every time I type ChatGPT in my command line, it's going to execute whatever is between these quotes right here. So in my case, when I write ChatGPT, it's going to run it's going to run Python, and then it's going to run my file, which is this one right here. In order to know where this file is, you can just access your terminal from your working repository, and you print pwd, print working repository. And as you can see, I am at users, Alejandro, desktop, and LangChain memory tutorial. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to go back to my zsh. And then here I have that I want to execute Python, and I want to execute this directory, and inside of this directory, I want to execute the main.py file, just as we were doing before. Then if I save it, and I open a new terminal session, if I open a new terminal session like this, there you go. Now I can do ChatGPT, and it's going to run directly the ChatGPT that I created before in my script. Okay, and here I can just go, hello. If at some point ChatGPT is not working for me, I can just come here, open ChatGPT like this, and every question is like less than a cent of a dollar, so it should be okay. So, hello, what is a pod in Kubernetes, for example? And it's going to come up with a response for me. So there you go. That's how to deal with memory in LangChain. We saw two different types of memory, which was buffer and entity memory. Just remember that there are more kinds of memory right here in the LangChain documentation. So don't forget to take a look into that. But I hope this was a good introductory video into how LangChain deals with memory and how you can deal with that in your own projects. All right. And also I hope that you will be able to use this app in your terminal whenever ChatGPT is down, or just to show off with your friends and all. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you learned a lot, and I will see you next time.